going to be one page to test them all by Preeti and Arosh. They are from ThoughtWorks. Preeti has been working at ThoughtWorks as a QA for more than 2 years. She has experience in testing of web apps. More recently, she has been working on mobile domain as well. She has a penchant for automation and making things simpler. And Arosh George is a lead consultant dev at ThoughtWorks with 11 years of IT experience. He is primarily a dev. He has worked on a variety of programming languages, but he is very enthusiastic about quality analysis as well. So he has worked on test practices and automation. So currently he is leading a large distributed team which is building a multi-platform mobile app. So that was about Preeti and Arosh. Outside? Okay, over to Preeti and Arosh.
Now the slides are alright. Let's get started. Hello, are we audible? Cool. Alright, let's get started off. Hi everyone, good morning. So we get started off. We are going to talk about the framework that we created in our first in our project. It's the automation test framework that we created. Hello. Okay, now it's better. Cool. Okay. Let's do this again. Hi everyone. We're going to talk about the automation framework. Cool. Okay. So we're going to talk about the automation test framework that we have designed in our project. And we are not. This is not going to be a presentation. We are actually trying to see if we can do a role play where me and Preeti would be pairing on actually designing this framework. So we'll start off with a set of requirements. We'll try and do an object modeling exercise, and then we'll try and apply it to a couple of use cases. Cool. So let's see how it goes. We haven't done role play before, so let's hope it works out well. Cool. So let's start off with setting some project context. This is a leading airline in US, and we are working on creating the mobile apps for them. The users are the airline passengers, airline travelers. And you can think of it having all the major features like check-in, flight status, boarding pass, booking flights online, right? All the typical features you might expect from an airline application, right? And we are supporting the app across multiple platforms, across 6 platforms. But the major platforms, of course, are Android, iOS, and mobile. And in fact, it's one of the leading, one of the featured apps on the Apple Play Store in the travel category. Couple of screenshots of the app. You can see that we have features about there's a boarding pass and the my trips, the my account features. As you can make out from the screenshots, our client has been very particular about the user experience. Give me some echo. Yeah, being very particular about the user experience, and that means that they have always insisted on as much of native UI as much as possible. But at the same time, we developers, we always have wanted to share code as much as possible, right, across the platforms. And to achieve that, we have created a custom open source cross-platform JavaScript framework, which actually allows us to share code between platforms, but still enable the native UI experience, right? So which means our application has a combination of pure native screens, pure HTML screens. We also have some screens which are HTML, but which invoke native widgets like calendar dropdown and all that. And we also have, of course, native screens with embedded HTML in them. So all combinations which allow best user experience and also allows to share code between all the platforms. Different platforms means different automation tools, the best tool for each platform. In our case, we have Calabash, iOS and Android for the native applications, and we are using Watir-Webdriver for the mobile web application. So let's start off with the problem statement. What's the problem statement, right? So we want to create a generic automation framework which will help us to do automation across the 3 platforms and across the 3 automation tools, and make it quite easy for the QAs to do that, right? And not spend too much time repeating tasks and all that, right? So with that as a problem statement, I'll hand over to Preeti to talk about the requirements.
As it is QA automation framework, right? It should be easy to add any automation. Of course, it should make life of QA very easy. These are some generic requirements where we should reuse the code and the automation framework should promote us to think in terms of higher level domain instead of low level UI interaction. What I mean by this is, it should tell us to think, it should promote us to think like, okay, I book the flight, I select this itinerary, instead of I select this drop down, I click this on button. These are some generic requirements, but as we were supporting cross-platform automation, we had these special requirements where we want to make change at only one place, and it should be easy to do it on other platforms as well. I mean, there is only one screen and the same functionality will be there on each of the platforms. Yeah, so it should be easy, and we should just use basic OO concepts and keep it simple. Yeah, so when I look at these requirements, I can clearly think of page object model is something which will suit us, right?
Yeah, I think makes sense. I think that's probably the great starting point, right? We all have used the page object pattern in our test frameworks, right? And it's a great framework where you have the page object which encapsulates the details of the UI, right? And all the UI locator elements and everything is encapsulated in the page object. And the page object exposes services for actions on the page, right? So if you look at following a page object model, I think it satisfies most of our requirements, right? We have domain-oriented thinking. Definitely changes need to be done in only one place in the page object, right? So I think this is a great start to start off framework, right?
Yeah. Okay. So page object pattern is something we can go with, but we have 3 screens, and if we go for that, we will have let's say, so all the functionality is similar across the platform, and if we have to do page objects, we have to design 3 page objects, as we are doing active development for Android, iOS and mobile web. So we have to we will end up in designing 3 page objects which will represent essentially same screen and which will expose similar services, like only the low level interactions will be different. And you think we have so many features and so many functionalities, so we will lead in designing so many page objects, and that will lead to class explosion.
Yeah, that's true. I think there will be too many classes for each page.
Yeah, and if we again check our requirements, right, it will not allow us to reuse the code. We have to change at multiple places, and also it will be very difficult to maintain. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I think so. That makes sense. So then, what are we suggesting? Are we talking about having a common page object for all the screens?
Yeah, perhaps that is not a bad idea. I mean, we can have a single page object which will represent 3 screens, and it satisfies the requirement which the earlier where we had 3 page objects which will represent 3 different screens. Those were not satisfying the requirements, like we have to make changes at multiple places, and we have to repeat the automation. So yeah, having single page object for which will represent different screens seems to solve our problem.
Yeah, I think it does make sense. It solves the problems, but I see some concerns, right? I mean, is it really feasible? Because we are using 3 different automation frameworks with different automation APIs. So our page object will need to cater to all the different APIs, right?
Okay.
And even the UI actions are different. Like I do a click on a mobile web, but I do a tap on the applications, right? And I can see more concerns like even because we have combination of native and HTML, right? Even the implementation of screens can all be different. So the element locators, element IDs, they'll all be different for the same screen across platforms. So it seems difficult to imagine that you can have one page object for screen. And finally, if you think about it, right, some of the UX interaction patterns for each platform are different, right? For example, for iOS, we talk about navigation through a tab bar, whereas for Android, it's a navigation drawer which slides in from the left, right? So I think there are a lot of issues. I'm not sure how we will do that.
Yeah, and even I searched online, and whenever I Google for it, even the Calabash style guide, which is like standard tool which we use for Android automation, and they also suggest to use different page objects for different platforms.
Right.
Yeah, so this seems interesting, having one page object which will represent all 3 screens. Do you want to give it a try?
Yeah, I think it definitely seems that it might solve our problems. So why not give it a shot? Let's try an object modeling exercise, and let's see where it goes from there.
Okay, cool.
So, yeah. So what should be the key fields? Let's start with the page class, right? That's our starting point. So what should be the key fields that we should have in a page class?
Okay. Whenever we whenever we write a feature file, we refer to particular page by some name, let's say login page, admin page, or flight status page, and etc. So definitely name is something I can think of. So if we take the example of login, it will have string, name as a string, and in case of login, it will be login.
Great, that's a good starting point.
Okay.
And I can add to that, I think let's have an identifier for a page, just like the name, right? But this time the identifier would be used to check if the page is actually loaded on the device, right? So I can find out if the page is loaded on the device by checking for if a unique element on the page has actually loaded on the screen. It could be a title of the page, or it could be, let's say, a login page with some user element which is there, right? So if I model it that way, and if I have page as an identifier, and that can be used to check if the page is loaded on the screen, and that seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
And that could be the locator for the unique element for that page.
Okay. But we have 3 different platforms, right? And we are having one page object. So
right, so the locators could be different for each platform.
Right.
I think we can just, what you can do is just model it as a hash map, where each platform's locators can be specified in the hash map with a key as the platform ID and the specific locators for that. So in this example you have, let's say, payment info identifies the payment page. So we have the locators for each platform, and this can be encapsulated in the page, right? And what you can do is, this is just a hash map, but we can actually put it into, encapsulate it in a page ID class, which represents the identifier for the page. And you can have the behavior called exists, which I can use to check if the element exists on the page, right? So it will look something like this, where I do query locator of empty in Calabash and Android, but in Watir-Webdriver I use the browser.element, right?
Yeah. So if I look at the code of exist, right, this is how it will look like. So if it is Android, it will do something. If it is mobile, we will check for the presence of the locator. And when I look at this, I can think that we can abstract out this behavior, and we can delegate this functionality to driver class, which will do exist check depending on the platform. So what I mean really is, so we will have page. Page has page ID, and so each different exist method will look like something this, where we will delegate exist method to driver, and which will do a exist check. Does this sound? I mean.
Right. So I think this is great. I think we have a driver abstraction which delegates to each platform, right? That makes sense. Cool. So what next can we think of? I can think of the elements on a page. Let's say if I have a login page which has elements like username, their password, and a submit button. Let's see how we can model the elements on a page, right? So I could perhaps have an elements class which represents each element on the page. I can capture the IDs for each of them, again like a hash map like we had before. Right, so here we have the done button, which is an element on the page, right? And the specific locators for each platform.
Yeah.
And definitely in terms of behavior, we can have something like all the interactions I can do with the element, right? So let's say, for example, I can click on element, and it can have a similar implementation as it exists in the page ID, but the click will delegate to the specific drivers, right? So I think we can reuse the driver concept here, and we can have page as elements, and elements has a click method which is delegated to a specific driver, and the driver will execute a specific code on each platform.
Cool. Yeah, so we model element perfectly and we delegated actions to driver. And when I think of elements, and if we take the example of login page, we have multiple elements. We have text box, we have button, and similarly we have other elements as well.
Right.
And they have their own specific behavior. For example, text box, we can set the text. If it is checkbox, we check or uncheck. If it is drop down, we select the drop down. So I think we can again abstract out this behavior, and we can inherit from element, and yeah, we can delegate the specific action to driver.
That's interesting. So we have different elements for each type of element, and they abstract specific action from that.
Right.
That's cool. Great. I think we modeled most of the fields on the page, right? So let's talk more about, we now have elements. what do we do with the elements, right? Let's say we do a click, and then what usually happens is that, let's take an example of the login page, right? So let's say you have a login page, you log in and you go to the home page post login, right? So typically what you do is click on the login button, wait for the next page to load, which is the home page. And because you're using page of the pattern, you would create an instance of the next page and return it to the other consumers, right?
Right. Yeah, so when I look at this function, right, this will be common logic across the platform, where we will click on something, we will wait for some page to load, and we will return that next page. And this is the core logic where transition will happen between the pages. So, and this will be repeated across your platform many times. So
that's almost most of the actions that result in a transition will have the same logic. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, we can abstract out this behavior as well.
Cool. Yeah. Let's try and see if we can put it into common place which can be reused across the code, right?
Okay.
So should we start off by putting it in the driver? We have a driver abstraction, and that's where the click action happens.
Okay. But driver is only supposed to do some low-level UI interaction, right? And this is something is your page logic, and your driver should not know about the pages. So driver doesn't seem to be a good place. Can we do it in elements?
Elements, I think elements is at a higher level than driver, so this does seem to make sense. But not all elements, the click action will lead to a transition, right? Let's say, for example, we have checkbox. Click on the checkbox. It doesn't lead to any page transition or doesn't take it to the next page.
Right.
So if I put in element.click, it won't be really applicable to all the elements.
Right. So that makes me think we need some element which is aware of transition, like button or link, and which will do transition. I mean, yeah. So let's like transition element.
Right. So we are talking about having an element which is aware of transitions.
Right.
Perhaps you can call it a transition element, right? And that can encapsulate the behavior to check for the next transitions, right? So let's model that. Let's have a transition element.
Yeah.
So let's have a transition element class which inherits from the element, and which will be very similar to an element which will have the locators and everything. But we can pass as a parameter the page class of the next page that you transition to. So for example, in this I'm saying that on login click, I have a 2 which the transition to the home page.
Okay. Yeah. This sounds good. But what if, let's say, again take example of login page, and when I log in, depending on my user status, I will be redirected to multiple pages. What I mean to say is, if I am a guest user, if I am a normal user, I will be redirected to normal member page. Where if I am a admin user, I will be redirected to some admin page. So here, on same click action, we have 2 transitions.
Right.
Yeah, perhaps we can simply pass an array to 2, like something like this.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think if you have multiple transitions, you can just model that by having an array which represents that.
Yeah.
Fair. And I think that brings me to, that reminds me of another transition.
Okay.
Let's say, take the login example again, right? And we have modeled a success transition, but what about login failures, right? If the login fails, then it remains on the same login page. And how do you model that? I think we can model that by having an error parameter, which will represent the error page that you transition to. Similar to. So you have 2 is the success transition, error will be the error transition.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, and this error transition reminds me another scenario, which is, let's say my application has bug, and if we take again login example, even though I am a normal user, I will be redirected to admin page. And this 2 transition, as it has admin page as well as member page, it will match with admin page and it will return me admin page. So our framework will not catch this bug.
That's true. I mean, the framework wouldn't understand if it's being a success transition or a transition, right? Because if it is a bug in the application, then it will return the right page. But I think if we try to put it into a framework, then we'll just have too much code in our framework, right?
Yeah.
We'll be repeating application code in the framework, and that's going to make our framework very complex. So I don't think we should go that approach. I think we should just let the tests handle the failure conditions and risks, and let the test for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What do you think? That makes sense, right?
Yeah. So our transition element will not bother about transitions.
Right.
It will just the return matching element.
Right.
And our test will take care that what page to assert.
Perfect, yeah, cool.
Cool.
Great.
Yeah, so let's look at some code. So this is how our code will look like for wait till next page load, where we will check for either two-page or error page matching, and if any match is found, it will return immediately, and we will time box this activity for 30 seconds. And yeah, if it doesn't found any match with any transition, then it will just throw a wait timeout error.
Great, cool. I think we have modeled the basic framework well.
Right.
Now let's try and apply it to some use cases and see how it works out, right?
Cool.
Cool. So let's start off with a good use case, which is fairly complex. What do you want to go with?
I think seatmap is one which is very complex.
Okay.
Because if you see, this is combination of native elements as well as HTML, and yeah. So whatever these are whatever highlighted in red are the accordions. Above one is the flight accordion, then passenger accordion, and the next one is webview, which is HTML, which is common across the platform. And what differs here is only accordion, which are accordions and buttons. Those are native to the platform, whereas this HTML is common. So if I want to, so let's start with feature file. And if I want to, as a user, if I want to select the seat, I will pass the data in the table. I want to select the seat for this origin, destination, for this passenger, and I will pass the seat number. And when I look at this, I can already imagine that we will have something seat map page, and which will expose the service called as select seat,
Okay.
and which will accept the parameters which we passed in table like flight, passenger, and seat number. Yeah, so this is how our step definition will look like, where we will call the seat, we will create first seat map instance, and we will call the service select seat with respective parameters. Yeah.
Great, that looks great. So let's try and see how the CPAM class would look like. Okay. So I know that I need to actually click on the flight leg first, and then the flight passenger, and then I need to select the CPAM, right? So let me model the elements for the leg accordion, the passenger accordion, and the seat map. And I know there can be multiple passengers or multiple flight legs.
Right.
So I need to parameterize the locators by the passenger name or the flight details.
Right.
So that's how I think I modeled. So I modeled leg, web, and passenger.
Okay.
And each of the element locators have been parameterized. And I can think of implementing the service this way. So my core service is select seat for packs for leg. It takes in flight leg, packs name, and seat number, right? And I can delegate to other service methods like select the leg, then select the passenger accordion, and then finally do the action of select seat.
Yeah.
So, and each of the service methods will delegate to the respective elements, and the elements will delegate to the respective drivers. So I think this will work very well across all the platforms, and we won't have any issues.
Right. Yeah. So okay, let's see what happens when we actually click on the seat. So when we click on the seat, it opens a seat details page where whatever we have selected the seats, it will show the seat details with respect to passengers and respective flight detail. So of course, as we have seen earlier, in the to transition, it will be seat details, and it will expose a service called as close, where we will close the seat map and it will return us a new page. So going back to our step definition, so seatmap.close will return us a new page, which is seat details page, and again on seat details page, I will expose service which will probably give me seat details depending on the passenger and flight, and I can verify the same.
Right. So code becomes quite simple, right? You just have to do dot close and that in the next page, and you just verify on it. Right? Cool.
Yeah.
So that's a good example. Should we move on to let's try and see if let's review our progress. Like how much have we done, right?
Okay.
So we had a problem of different tools and UIs.
Yeah.
Is that solved, right?
With driver abstraction we solve this.
Right, cool. And different platform implementation for the same screen. I think the element locator map takes care of that as well.
Yeah.
UX interaction pattern. I think that's the last bit we haven't still tried out, right?
Right.
So let's take an example which will be good application for this.
I think navigation drawer is something I can think of,
Okay.
where it will be different in each of the platform.
Perfect. So let's say we have the iOS screen, right? On the iOS app, we have the tab bar at the bottom which says My Trips Today Book Feed. That's my primary navigation menu. And on my mobile web, I have a menu at the top which slides down, which is my primary navigation.
Okay.
Whereas the primary navigation on Android is the navigation drawer which slides from left, right? It's not always visible,
Right.
but I have to click on the home icon to make it visible and then can do it.
Right.
So all the three platforms are primary navigation, but the iOS also has a secondary navigation.
Right.
And that's the more button which I click, right?
Yeah.
So when I click on the more button, I have this blue thing which pops up, which is the secondary navigation, which is flight status, airports and fleet. And each of these will take me to a respective page.
Yeah.
So it is a complex set of user interaction. I'm not very sure how we model this, but yeah, let's give it a shot.
Yeah. So I can think of this as a menu.
Okay.
And each menu has these menu items. Okay, and menu will be identified by name and page ID as we have done in case of page.
Right.
And what special we'll have in menu item is name, where we'll represent like whatever string is present on menu item, that will be name for menu item. And target page, whenever we click on menu item, what page to open.
Right.
Also, as we have seen in case of iPhone, we have primary as well as secondary navigation. So each menu item will specify that okay, it is primary or secondary. And also we will have menu button where we will where actually click will happen.
Right.
And if you look at the services of the menu, what services it will offer me. First I have to make sure that okay, my menu is shown. So I will have menu.show.
Right.
And then I want to launch the menu item from menu. So menu will expose the service called as launch, and it will accept the menu item, and it will show the menu item. So this will look something like this, where we will show the menu. If we look at the definition of launch, we first have to show the primary menu, then we have to show, we have to look up for menu item, and we will do an extra action if it is only secondary, and finally we will click on the menu item, which will return you the next page.
Right. So the show action will actually take effect only on iOS, only on Android and web. Because
Right.
on iOS is always visible.
Right.
And the show secondary will take effect only on iOS, right?
Right.
So let me see how we can model it. So in case of Droid, I need to click on the home icon. So I'll model a primary menu button, which is applicable for web and Droid. And I'll specify the home ID as the primary menu button, which when I click, which is what show will do. So show will click on it and actually show the menu. For iOS, I need to model the secondary menu button, which is the more button.
Right.
So I'll call it, and that's the menu button I invoke from my show secondary. And I think that way I can model the fact that both these services will show their respective menus.
Cool. Yeah. So let's.
So this is how more will actually kick off.
Yeah. So let's look at the menu item class as well.
Right. So I think the menu item class, as you said, will have these fields: the name, page type, and the menu button. And the menu button will actually wait for the next page to load, which is dynamically set to the constructor.
Okay.
This is how I'll probably construct a menu item. I'll say flight status, and I'll specify in this case a secondary menu item. And my is secondary, in this case, is secondary only for iOS, but it could be primary for other platforms, right? So my is secondary will look up the hash map at runtime and figure out if it's secondary or not.
As we have done for keymap locator.
Right. Cool.
Cool.
So I think that way our same page object for same classes for menu item will actually work across platforms because for example, the show will actually ignore. So I have put the iOS, the primary menu button, right, which is always visible in iOS. The click on that will not do anything. It will just it is always visible. So that way, the same set of operations can actually work across platforms.
Right, and this solves our the last problem, which is different UX interaction patterns.
So
right?
framework seems to solve that problem as well.
Right.
The menu and the menu item abstraction kind of help us solve that problem.
Right. Yeah. So I would like to share some implementation notes. I will quickly wind up these things. So you might be curious that how we are using driver class. So we are requiring the respective driver class when we are running specific automation suite. Also we have page registry which we query where each page register to that page registry, and we look up for the page whenever we need to do any action with page. Also, this will be surprising, but yeah, we have tests for our tests. So we have written aspect unit test where we check, if as we have added more logic, right? So we do that. And it is good practice whenever you see that some things are getting repeated, automated. So we have seen the common template for the pages and we have created rake tasks for the same.
Right, I think in future direction, a couple of thoughts. We think that we can probably enhance the framework by adding some kind of debugging support, which will provide useful debug information. And perhaps you can also have something like a slow element query finder. Some locators take a long, if you use an XPath, it takes long to resolve, right? So a couple of points about what future direction that we can add to the framework.
Yeah. And learnings, definitely QA dev pairing helped us a lot.
Right. Yeah, I think definitely. I think, and what I really liked is that how we were both able to bring our own perspectives into the design, right? And finally, I think we came to a much better solution.
Right. Also, when we looked at the problem, it was a very big and complex problem for us to solve. That how should we do automation for these 3 platforms? But then we took baby steps and we did use case driven development where we identified, like as we did in this talk, we identified some use cases and we did evolve our framework over the time.
Cool. And I think framework today continues to evolve as more and more developers are working on it and finding more use cases. We're continuing to evolve the framework. Cool. So to summarize, I think the key takeaway for us from this exercise that while creating the framework was that good over design is the key. If you have the right abstractions in place, then you can solve a lot of hard problems, and that is what actually has helped us design this framework and reuse code across all the platforms.
So with that, today to add automation to support these 3 platforms, we just have to make change at one place, and that's it. That's all.
That's it, guys. Thanks.
So now we have like few minutes for questions if you have any. Any questions for Preeti and Aroj?
So if my understanding is correct, let's say you have a 3-page application, so it's going to run on 3 different platforms.
Yeah.
So your execution framework will just contain 1-page object, basically. Correct?
Yeah.
See, for example, I want to run my automation on Android.
Yes.
So I have 1-page object in memory, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So you'll be adding all those elements in that page object for all 3 pages?
Not all 3 pages, so rather there's the same screen on all 3 platforms, right?
Okay, let's say my app has 3 screens. So I'm going to run on
3 different screens?
Correct. 3 different screens.
So there are 3 different functionalities which will expose different services, right? So you'll have 3 different page classes that represents, so each page class will represent 1 screen which has similar set of services, right? And if you look at the page object, so I think the key question for us is that, does my page or screen expose the same services on each of the platforms? So the login screen will be the same on each of the platform, right?
I'm just think about the implementation perspective. So you won't write any concrete 3 classes, 1 for each screen, right?
Yeah, that's the main thing which we wanted to avoid, because we didn't want to have duplication of code between multiple platforms.
Okay, so I was just thinking of a suggestion so if you have one particular page in your object hierarchy and start creating objects for each screen, right? So why can't you have one more level of inheritance, say Android page, iOS page?
So so I think that's a good point, and we did consider that during our design framework, right? The key thing is, what are we trying to reuse across the pages, right? We are trying to reuse the services, and the set of actions. For example, seat map example, right? When I click on the select seat example, right? If you see, where is the same set of actions, where first you click on leg, and then on the passenger, and then on the seat. So the core abstractions, the core logic, if you see, is actually the same, whether it's an Android page or an iOS page. And if you put that into the concrete classes, then you'll end up repeating. What is really changing across the platforms is actually there's a data, which is a locator IDs. And that is the core reason we do not want to create multiple pages, because we don't want to, just the data is changing, right? And the other thing that is changing is the driver implementation. And for that, we have put in a driver abstraction, which just knows about low-level driver stuff. So there was a motivation for having page has elements, and page and elements are common across all platforms. Elements direct to driver, and driver is what is specific to each platform.
Yeah, I can understand. So the reason why I try to introduce one more level of inheritance is if there is altogether any new platform-specific behavior is identified, we can add it in the respective
Definitely,
place.
and the page user framework won't actually stop you from doing that. Right? Let's say you have a login page example again, right? Let's say your login on Android and iOS is slightly different. Maybe there are more options. You can do login in different ways. So you can go ahead and do that. It doesn't really stop you from doing that actually. Essentially, you can use proper object-oriented design to have the proper hierarchy. What is common you can put in the base class, and what is specific you can derive and override. And if you want to do something different, you can do it. It doesn't stop it. But we don't have examples of that, so we don't have to do it.
So that is one last question from my side. So let's say you have automated some 100 tests, you have written code for it. So you have populated your map in your page for a couple of platforms, say Android and iOS into picture. So let's say there is a maintenance activity, I am introducing a new platform, my business decides to put that. So are you going to go for entire test and I have to populate that map entry?
Right, so how would you really do about going about doing it, right? So you would probably start off by writing the basic user flow, right? And you will start creating page objects to map each user flow. And if your user flow is really similar to all the other platforms, then your job is already half done, right? You can reuse the same feature file, the same step definition. The only thing which actually change is your the IDs in each page object.
That's
so
precisely my question. I am introducing a new platform. So do I have to place a map entry in all my tests? I have to go and visit every piece of code. I put a map entry.
The current design means that you have to have add one more entry in your hash map. So your hash map are keys for iOS, Droid, and this thing, right? So if you're using Windows Phone, then it's a new entry in your hash maps.
Okay, so that's precisely my suggestion is. So why can't you go and use factory design pattern for that map rather than putting map as a concrete property in your page class? So why can't you delegate that to a subclasses of initializing the map? So I'm done.
Right.
So even though we will use the factory pattern, right, we have to essentially change the locators wherever we have used pages before. So yeah, that is like, it's a win-win situation. You have to take a call and so this why we did this, because it was suited for our conditions.
The locators are different on Windows anyways, right? So you have to go and change the locators, and that you cannot avoid, and that's the overhead of supporting new platform, I would say.
Thank you. Feel free to catch up with Preeti and Aroj offline if you have any other questions. So thank you, Preeti and Aroj. So we have a small goodie as a token of gratitude.